The stars over Cadia were dying. One by one, their light faltered, smothered by the crawling tide of the immaterium that swelled from the Eye of Terror. Even the constellations that had guided mankind's voyages for millennia seemed unfamiliar now, their ancient patterns fractured by the warp's luminous rot. Ships burned in silence above the world's bruised sky, their wreckage falling like new constellations to join the broken ground below. The wind carried with it the acrid tang of atomized stone and the ghostly whispers of prayers left unanswered. Across the Cadian gate, the bastion world's fortresses stood cracked and hollow, their proud walls now tombstones for regiments that had sworn oaths here and died in their fulfillment. Somewhere beyond those ruins, the largest battle the Imperium had ever fought raged. Millions of mortal soldiers, hundreds of titans, whole fleets locked in a struggle that had already consumed generations of lives. And yet, the war was already lost. We who tell you this tale do not do so as distant chroniclers, but as companions on this last journey. We are here, in this moment, with you. We see the same embers in the void, hear the same dying echoes. We care for you, the listener, as much as for the doomed souls whose story you are about to hear, because in their struggle you may see a reflection of your own. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. Lord Castellan Garin Vorsk stood on the observation deck of Casa Vasanth, one of the last intact command bastions on Cadia. The deck's shattered viewport was webbed with cracks, each line glowing faintly where the void shield's residual field struggled to contain the poisoned atmosphere outside. His eyes tracked the horizon, a jagged line of blackened fortress towers and gutted hab blocks, stretching until it merged with the writhing auroras that mark the edge of reality itself. For 27 years, Vorsk had defended Cadia with a soldier's stubbornness and a commander's grim patience. He had refused every transfer, every reassignment. Cadia was his oath, his cage, his identity. But tonight, in the lingering half-light of a dying star, he was forced to admit the truth he had long kept buried. The Imperium would not save them. The fleets were scattered, the reinforcements broken before they reached the gate, and the High Lord's edicts were nothing but distant echoes in the storm. He touched the hilt of his saber, a blade gifted to him by his first regiment, engraved with the names of every Cadian who had fallen under his command. The steel was worn smooth from decades of battle, yet still sharp enough to cut through carapace and faith alike. It was the only constant he had left. Behind him, the soft scrape of boots broke the silence. Captain Lizara entered, her dark hair tied back in the severe style of the Casa Guard, her flak armor dusted with soot and the faint, metallic scent of lasfire residue. "My lord," she said, bowing her head briefly before stepping to his side. "We've lost Casa Kel entirely. The southern defense line is gone." Vorsk's jaw tightened, though his gaze never left the horizon. "And the garrison? They fought to the last, sir. No survivors." He closed his eyes for a moment, not in grief, but in calculation. Each fallen bastion was another wound in Cadia's flesh, another artery severed. Every death was a measure of time lost, not saved. "The Inquisitor will want a word," Lysara added quietly. "She arrived an hour ago, claims she has intelligence that cannot wait." Vorsk gave a humorless smile. Inquisitors always do. They descended from the observation deck into the heart of the bastion. Casa Vasanth's command chamber was a patchwork of functioning cogitators and improvised field vox units, their screens flickering with static warped maps. The Inquisitor was waiting, tall, severe, and dressed in armor of matte black, etched with symbols Vorsk didn't recognize. Her eyes, pale as bleached bone, fixed on him with something between accusation and pity. "Lord Castellan," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "We are out of time." He raised an eyebrow. "That has been true for some time now, Inquisitor." "This is different. The next wave will not merely breach Cadia's defenses, it will erase the planet entirely. My order has authorized an alternative." Lysara tensed. "An alternative?" The Inquisitor stepped closer, lowering her voice. "There are pacts, ancient, dangerous, but effective. There are those beyond the Imperium's reach who can grant Cadia the strength to endure, perhaps even forever." Vorsk studied her face. "You speak of Xenos, or worse." "I speak of survival." Her pale gaze did not waver. "The question is whether you value the Imperium's approval more than your world's life." Lysara's hand drifted to the grip of her sidearm. "This is heresy. This is reality," the Inquisitor snapped. "Your Emperor cannot hold back what is coming, but there are others who can." The chamber was silent, save for the distant tremor of bombardment. Vorsk felt the weight of the choice settle on him like a second armor, heavier, colder. To even consider the Inquisitor's offer was to betray the Imperium. To refuse it was to consign Cadia to death. And yet, somewhere in the back of his mind, the thought lingered. What if she was right? A thunderclap tore through the sky above, shaking the bastion to its foundations. Sirens wailed as Vox feeds reported fresh breaches along the western wall. The war was not waiting for his decision. Vorsk turned to Lysara. "Ready the 3rd Regiment. Hold the wall." She hesitated, searching his face for the man she thought she knew. "And you?" "I will speak to our guest." Her expression hardened, but she saluted. "For Cadia," she said, and left. The Inquisitor's lips curved into something that might have been satisfaction, or the shadow of it. "You have questions," she said. "I have doubts," Vorsk replied. She nodded once. "Then let us see if we can turn them into resolve." Outside, the dying stars continued their slow retreat into darkness. The war room of Casa Vazanth was dim, its light provided only by the pale glow of hololithic maps and the flicker of burning data scrolls. Outside, the bass rumble of artillery was constant, like the heartbeat of some colossal dying beast. Lord Castellan Garin Vorsk stood over the central tactical display, his hand resting on the hilt of his saber. Across from him, Inquisitor Avon Reese moved with deliberate predatory grace, her pale eyes catching and holding the light in a way that unsettled even hardened veterans. She spoke as though reading from a script written long before either of them had been born. "There is a weapon, Castellan. It does not fire shells or beams. It does not rely on manpower or the Imperium's crumbling supply chains. It is older, forged before the Emperor walked among men." Vorsk said nothing. Words could be traps, and he could hear the baited steel in hers. Riss circled the table, gesturing to the map. "Cadia is the lock. The Eye of Terror is the door. This weapon is the key. But keys open more than one thing, Castellan. And some doors," her lips curved faintly, "cannot be closed again." He folded his arms. "And what exactly lies beyond the door you want me to open?" "Survival," she said simply. The word lingered in the air. It was not a word the Imperium used lightly. In the Guard, survival without victory was failure. Survival without obedience was treason. Vorsk felt Lysara's absence like a missing limb. She had gone to hold the western wall with the 3rd Regiment, as ordered. Her voice was still in his head. For Cadia. Simple, unflinching. And here he was, listening to the slow hiss of heresy. I will not sell my world to Xenos, he said, and I will not trade it to the dark gods. The Inquisitor tilted her head. Not all beyond the veil serve chaos, Castellan. There are powers older than the gods of the warp. They remember when your kind were little more than animals. Her words sparked an unwanted thought, rumors Vorsk had dismissed over the years, of ancient beings who had once ruled the stars, of relics that could shatter whole worlds or remake them. You expect me to believe such myths? He asked. She smiled faintly. The truth doesn't need your belief, Castellan, only your use. Before he could reply, the Vox crackled violently, filling the room with the clipped voice of a comms officer. Enemy armor breach, Sector 5-4. 3rd Regiment holding, but requesting immediate reinforcement. Vorsk clenched his jaw. Lizara was there. The Inquisitor stepped aside. Decide, quickly. When Cadia falls, your choices will die with it. He left without answering. The western wall was a jagged skeleton of ferrocrete and steel, its defensive emplacements reduced to molten craters. Beyond it stretched a killing field, choked with the wreckage of tanks and the twisted remains of Chaos war engines. The air shimmered with heat from las fire and the oily smoke of Prometheum strikes. Vorsk found Lysara in the midst of it, helmet off, her face streaked with grime, barking orders to the scattered remnants of her regiment. Her eyes lit briefly when she saw him, but her voice was all business. They've been pushing armor through the breach every half hour. We've held them, but they're massing for another wave. Vorsk surveyed the line. Fewer than 200 men, where once there had been 1,000. Ammo packs were near empty. Prometheum reserves were spent. Even the wounded stood with laser guns clutched in trembling hands. He stepped close enough for only her to hear. The Inquisitor has an offer. She claims she can end this. Lysara's expression sharpened, as if she'd been struck. End this, or end us? She speaks of something ancient, he admitted. Something outside the Imperium's reach. Her jaw tightened. Then it is not ours to trust. The day we make pacts with what lurks beyond the stars, we stop being Cadians. He wanted to argue, but the next wave of enemy fire slammed into the breach, and all words were drowned in the roar of war. Hours blurred into a haze of fire and steel. Vorsk fought like a man possessed, las pistol in one hand, saber in the other, cutting down chaos marauders that clawed over the walls. The air was thick with the scent of blood and burning metal, the screams of the dying punctuated by the guttural roars of traitor Astartes. At one point, the world narrowed to a single moment. A bolt shell screamed past his head. Lysara shoved him aside, and they fell together into the shadow of a broken wall. For a heartbeat, they were alone. The war reduced to the sound of their breathing. You're not thinking of taking her offer, are you? She demanded, her voice low and fierce. He met her gaze. I'm thinking of Cadia. Her eyes searched his face. Whatever she saw there, it made her look away. Then the line broke. When the breach was finally sealed, by collapsing the outer wall entirely, the cost was ruinous. The 3rd Regiment was a name only. Its survivors could fit in a single Valkyrie transport. Lysara sat on a ration crate, cleaning the blood from her armor, with slow, deliberate strokes. Vorsk approached, but before he could speak, a figure stepped from the shadows of the shattered wall. His armor was a deep, shifting blue, its edges rimmed with green. The helmet was shaped like a predator's skull, its eyes glowing faintly. Vorsk's hand went to his pistol. Identify yourself. The figure's voice was calm, almost amused. Names are fluid. For tonight, you may call me Althar. Lysara rose, weapon ready. Alpha Legion. The name was poison in the air. Althar inclined his head. Your reputation for clarity precedes you, Captain. His gaze slid back to Vorsk. You've been offered survival, Castellan. But what you've not been told is how to achieve it without surrendering Cadia to another master. I'm listening, Vorsk said, despite Lysara's hiss of warning. Althar's smile was hidden by his helm, but it was there in his voice. We can give you the tools to drive them back. No pacts with gods. No oaths to Xenos. Just strength. Enough to hold your world. And in return, only that you remember who gave you the means. And when the time comes, that you listen. The shadows seem to deepen around him. The Imperium will not save you, Castellan. But perhaps you can save yourself. And then he was gone, slipping into the smoke like a memory that refused to fade. That night, Vorsk stood alone on the observation deck again, watching the Eye of Terror pulse like a diseased heart. Inquisitor Reese's voice echoed in one ear, Althar's in the other, and Lysara's silence between them. 3 paths, none of them clean. Cadia slept uneasily beneath the dying stars. Dawn came late to Cadia now. The sun was a weak, pale coin. Its light strained through the crimson haze bleeding from the Eye of Terror. In the shattered corridors of Kasr Vasanth, shadows pooled like spilled oil, and every sound seemed heavier, as though the air itself bore the weight of coming ruin. Lord Castellan Garin Vorsk stood in the armory, his gauntlets resting on the steel case before him. It was unmarked, save for the faint, twisting serpent sigil etched into the locking mechanism, a mark he had not seen in years, but knew well enough to recognize. Alpha Legion craftsmanship. The case had been delivered without fanfare. No one had seen the courier. The sentries swore the door had never opened. But it had been waiting for him when he entered, sealed and silent, as though it had simply appeared from the stone itself. He had told no one. The lock disengaged with a whisper. Inside lay weapons and devices unlike anything in Cadia's standard arsenal. Compact las rifles with emitters tuned to a pitch that could shear through power armor. Grenades the size of a clenched fist that, if the inscriptions were true, could collapse a bunker into dust without so much as a fireball. And at the center, a palm-sized disc of smooth black metal, its surface rippling faintly like water under moonlight. A note lay beneath it, written in precise Gothic script. When the breach comes, place the disc upon the ground. Step back. No signature. None needed. Vorsk closed the case, his jaw tightening. This was the first step. One he could not untake. Lysara found him an hour later in the command, Scha'al chamber. She looked more tired than he had ever seen her, eyes shadowed, movements sharp but slow, like a blade dulled by overuse. The next wave will be worse, she said, dropping a data slate onto the table. The slate flickered with auger readings of troop movements, enemy armor massing on 3 separate fronts. Worse is relative, Vorsk replied, scanning the projections. They haven't broken us yet. They will, she said bluntly. We're out of munitions for half our emplacements. Power reserves are being diverted from life support in the lower hab blocks just to keep the void shields stable. We can't hold. He didn't look up. Then we find another way. Her gaze narrowed. Another way. Or that way. Vorsk finally met her eyes. Do you want to live to see another dawn, Lysara? I want to die knowing I was still a Cadian, she said, not a pawn for the things that whisper in shadows. The silence between them was sharp enough to draw blood. When the breach came, it was exactly where he knew it would be. Sector 12, where the old bastion wall had been weakened by months of siege fire. The enemy struck with precision, driving a wedge of chaos armor through the gap, their guns cutting down Cadian defenders as easily as reaping grain. Vorsk gave the order without hesitation. The black disc left the Alpha Legion case feeling heavier than its size should allow. He ran with it through the smoke and blood, vaulting rubble until he reached the heart of the breach. The enemy were almost upon him, a towering chaos predator lumbering forward, its hull spiked with trophies. Around it, corrupted infantry swarmed, howling praise to their gods. Vorsk knelt, placed the disc on the broken ground and stepped back. The surface shimmered once. Then the world folded inward. There was no blast, no heat, only silence, absolute and crushing, as though sound itself had been torn from the air. The predator and its escort froze mid-stride. Then, impossibly, they began to sink into the ground, as though the stone beneath them had turned to liquid. In less than 5 heartbeats, the breach was empty. No wreckage, no bodies, nothing. Vorsk heard himself exhale. They held Sector 12 that day. More than that, they pushed the enemy back for the first time in weeks. The men cheered his name, the victory lifting their weary shoulders. Even the Voxnet seemed lighter, voices crackling with cautious hope. Only Lysara did not join the celebration. She confronted him in the barracks after the fighting. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of an accusation. "That wasn't ours," she said. "No," he admitted. "You used them." "Yes." "Why?" "Because it worked," he said simply. Her eyes searched his face for any flicker of doubt, any shadow of regret. She found none. "You've changed," she whispered. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he was the same man she had followed into 100 battles, that he still fought for Cadia, still believed in the oath they had both sworn, but the words would not come. The Inquisitor arrived again 2 nights later, slipping into the war room as though she belonged there. "You've tasted victory," Riss said, her pale eyes fixed on him. "Now you understand. I understand that your allies are dangerous," Vorsk replied. Her smile was thin. "Dangerous is not the same as untrustworthy. They have no loyalty to chaos. They have no faith in your emperor. They care only for the game, and for those who can win it." He leaned forward across the table. "And what happens when the game ends?" Her smile widened, just a fraction. "It never ends." For the first time, Vorsk felt the faint pull of something like fear. In the weeks that followed, the Alpha Legion's gifts became a silent part of Cadia's defense. A pulse rifle here, a shock mine there. Always used sparingly, always just enough to turn defeat into stalemate, stalemate into survival. The men began to call it Vorsk's luck. Lysara did not call it luck. She called it what it was, a debt. And debts, in war, were always collected. It was on the 12th day after the breach that Althar appeared again, stepping from the smoke as casually as if he were walking into a quiet tavern. "You've done well, Castellan," he said. Vorsk kept his voice cold. "I didn't do it for you." "You did it for Cadia," Althar said, as though humoring a child. "We are not so different. We both fight for what we claim as ours." "And what is it you claim?" The Alpha Legionnaire tilted his head. "The future, and those with the will to shape it." Vorsk felt the weight of the unspoken truth settle between them. He was no longer certain whether Cadia's future would be shaped by the Imperium at all. The war room was colder than it should have been. not from the chill of Cadia's dying sun, but from the absence of faith. Maps lay scattered across the central table, inked with red markers that bled across the parchment like open wounds. Garin Vorsk stood at the head of the table, surrounded by his senior officers. Lysara was among them, her arms folded, her eyes fixed on the far wall rather than on him. The news was grim. 3 fortress districts lost in the north. Food convoys ambushed en route to the southern casas. Enemy aerial raids striking with unnatural precision, as if the skies themselves had turned against Cadia. The men looked to him for orders, the orders he had given for decades. Hold the line, trust the Emperor, fight until the enemy breaks. But those words no longer felt like weapons. They felt like lies. When the meeting ended, he remained alone in the war room. The chamber's Vox unit flickered once, then steadied. The voice that came through was smooth, like glass sliding over stone. The time comes, Castellan. Althar. The Imperium will not send help. We have intercepted the astropathic relays. Terror has already written you off. Cadia is a tomb in their eyes. Vorsk clenched his fists. You speak as though I should be surprised. You should be relieved, Althar said. Relieved, because it means you no longer owe them loyalty. I owe Cadia my loyalty, Vorsk said. Then keep it. But Cadia will not live by faith alone. Let us give you the means to feed your soldiers, to arm your casters, to ensure the Cadian name survives, even if the Imperium does not. Vorsk hesitated. And what would you want in return? Althar chuckled softly. Only that, when the dust clears, you remember who your friends were. That night, in the frost-hardened courtyard of Castra Vasanth, a convoy arrived. Its vehicles bore no imperial heraldry. Instead, they were painted in plain grey, the kind of colour that vanished into ruins and was remembered by no one. They brought weapons, armour, crates of rations, more than Vorsk had seen in months. But there was more. A Vox jammer, small and discreet, capable of severing an entire sector from Imperial communications. Chemical agents to render enemy infantry unconscious without killing them. And a set of encrypted data slates, Althar's gift, containing troop disposition maps from deep within the Chaos siege lines. It was the kind of intelligence no loyal servant of the Emperor should ever have. By dawn, Vorsk had given his first truly heretical order. Sector 9, where Imperial loyalists from the capital Casas had been holding against overwhelming odds, was to be abandoned. Their retreat would be covered not by Imperial forces, but by mercenaries from the convoy. Men who fought for coin, not creed. The plan was efficient, ruthless. It saved 3,000 Cadian lives and sacrificed 400 Imperial regulars in the process. Vorsk did not flinch. Lysara confronted him in his private quarters after the operation. She did not knock. You left them to die, she said, her voice low but sharp. I saved more than I lost, Vorsk replied without looking up from the reports. They weren't just numbers. They were soldiers who trusted you. Imperial soldiers. They were dead the moment the siege began. I gave the rest of us a chance. Her eyes narrowed. And at what cost? Those mercenaries you used. They weren't Cadian, Garin. They weren't even human, some of them. They fought when no one else would. They fought because they were paid. And where did that payment come from? Who else are you letting onto this world? Vorsk stood, finally meeting her gaze. Cadia will not fall, because I clung to purity while the walls burned around me. If the Emperor were here, perhaps he could save us. But he is not. Lysara's voice broke, not with weakness, but with rage. You're starting to sound like them. 2 days later, the Inquisitor Reese appeared again, unannounced. You've crossed the line, she said with quiet satisfaction. Good. I didn't do it for you, Vorsk replied. No, she said, but you did it for Cadia. And that is enough. You've seen now that loyalty is not a virtue, it's a leash. And leashes are meant to be cut. Her pale eyes glittered. The Alpha Legion does not waste those who have proved themselves useful. They will offer you more, and you will take it, because you know, deep down, that no one else is coming. Vorsk felt the truth in her words, like a blade in his ribs. By the week's end, rumors were already spreading through the casas. Whispers that Vorsk had struck bargains with ghost soldiers who came and went unseen. That enemy patrols were sometimes left alive, unscathed, in exchange for mysterious supplies. That Cadia's survival was no longer a matter of faith, but of deals made in shadow. He ignored them. But at night, when the fortress was quiet, he found himself staring at the black disk in its case, the one that had erased an entire chaos-armored column from reality. He had not used it again, but the temptation gnawed at him. The enemy would soon breach again. And when they did, he knew the Alpha Legion would be waiting, offering another solution, another choice, another step further from the man he had been. And perhaps, by then, there would be no steps left to take. The breach came at dawn. A thunderclap of artillery shattered the thin morning haze, turning the western sky into a rolling wall of fire. The fortress casas along the morning spire line vanished under the bombardment, reduced to choking dust and molten rock. Vox reports screamed over each other, too many at once, too frantic to pass. In the command tower, Garin Vorsk listened to them all, his jaw set. He did not ask for casualty counts. He knew they would be meaningless. By mid-morning, the breach was wide enough to swallow an entire armored regiment. Chaos armor surged through it, blackened hulls bristling with spikes and banners of flayed skin. The Imperial defenders fought like cornered beasts, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and already half dead from exhaustion. It should have been the end, but it wasn't, because the Alpha Legion kept its word. Out of the breach poured a different kind of army, unmarked yet disciplined, veterans of wars no Imperial historian would acknowledge. Their colors were hidden beneath drab armor, but Vorsk knew whose coin they carried. They struck the Chaos spearhead like a thunderbolt, not to destroy, but to disrupt, splitting formations, severing supply routes, and drawing enemy armor into ambushes they could never escape. The Morning Spire breach did not close that day, but neither did the enemy take the fortress heart. The cost, however, was not measured in blood alone. In Casa Holden's mess hall, Imperial sergeants argued openly with Cadian officers. The word traitor was whispered more often, and not always about the enemy. Lysara came to him that night. This time she looked less like a soldier and more like a mourner. They're saying you're feeding them, she said quietly. Vorsk didn't answer. They're saying the Alpha Legion fights here with your blessing, that we fight beside the same heretics we swore to burn from the galaxy. They're not heretics, Vorsk said finally. They're pragmatists. Her eyes went cold. That's the same thing, Garin. 3 days later, the mutiny began. It started in the southern casas, low-ranking Imperial troopers refusing to take orders from compromised Cadian officers. Then came the first gunfire between supposed allies. By the week's end, 2 regiments had barricaded themselves inside the grain silos, claiming they would not feed traitors. The fortress began to starve. Vorsk's council fractured. Some officers urged him to crush the mutiny with force. Others, especially those who had seen the Alpha Legion's efficiency in the field, argued to let the dissenters leave the walls entirely. Lysara's voice was the loudest in the opposition. "You cannot keep feeding both sides of this war," she told him. "Every day you trust them, you lose another piece of Cadia's soul. Cadia's soul won't matter if its body is dead," Vorsk snapped. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Then maybe it's already dead." The Alpha Legion offered a solution, as they always did. Althar came to him in the war room, his voice a silken coil. "Give us the silos," he said simply. "Let the mutineers starve themselves in the wastes. In return, we'll supply you for as long as it takes to end this siege." "And when the siege ends," Vorsk asked, "then Cadia will owe nothing to Terra and everything to those who kept it alive." The assault on the silos was swift, surgical, and entirely without mercy. It was not Cadian troops who led it, but Althar's mercenaries, silent killers who left no survivors. When the grain was redistributed, the fortress cheered. Lysara did not. She stood in the courtyard as the wagons rolled past, her gaze fixed on him with something between grief and disgust. "You've become exactly what they wanted," she said. "And you'd rather I let us all die?" Vorsk replied. "I'd rather we died as Cadians," she said, "not as something wearing their skin." That night, the enemy launched their largest assault yet. Wave after wave crashed against the walls, forcing every man and woman into the fight. Even Lysara fought beside him again, silent and grim, as though battle was the only place they could still stand together. By dawn, the walls still stood. The breach was held. And yet, in the quiet after the guns, Vorsk realized the enemy outside was not his greatest threat. The true danger was already inside the walls. The Alpha Legion had embedded themselves into Cadia's lifeblood, its supplies, its strategy, its very survival. Removing them now would be like cutting out his own heart. And perhaps, he thought in the stillness, that was the point. The fortress smelled of smoke and oil, like a dying machine still forcing itself to run. For weeks, the siege had tightened. The western breach no longer mattered. The enemy had tunneled beneath the southern walls, and every night the earth shook with underground detonations. Entire sections of the outer casas had been swallowed by sinkholes, their defenders entombed in silence. The Alpha Legion fought with the same cold precision as always, but now their presence was no longer hidden. They wore their colors openly, deep ocean blues and serpent emblems, defiant against the golden aquila of the Imperium. And still, Garin Vorsk allowed them in his war councils, because without them, Cadia would already be ash. It was on the 103rd day of the siege that the demand came from Terra, a priority-encoded astropathic message, its words crackling through the mind of the fortress psyker until blood ran from her eyes. Cadian High Command, expel all heretic elements from your defense. Failure to comply will be considered willful treason. The Emperor protects. Vorsk read the parchment 3 times before setting it down. The words might as well have been a death warrant. If he obeyed, the Alpha Legion would leave, and the walls would fall within a week. If he disobeyed, Terra would mark Cadia as lost, and no relief would ever come. That night, Lysara found him in the tower. "They've given you a choice," she said, voice flat. "A clean one, for once." "There's nothing clean about it," Vorsk replied. She stepped closer, eyes sharp in the torchlight. "There is. Either you're still Cadian, or you're already one of them." He almost told her the truth, that he had already made the choice days ago, that the Alpha Legion had offered him more than just soldiers. They had offered him continuity, a Cadia that would survive, even if it no longer bore the Emperor's mark. Instead, he only said, "I will do what keeps this world alive." Her jaw tightened. "Then I hope you enjoy the taste of ashes." The purge came at dawn, but it was not the Alpha Legion who were purged. Cadian regiments loyal to Terra were disarmed, stripped of command, and marched into the lower bastions under protective custody. Officers who refused were executed swiftly, shot in the head before their squads. The Alpha Legion took over the grain silos, the munitions foundries, and the southern casas without firing a shot. From the highest tower, Vorsk watched the Imperial banners come down. Somewhere in the crowd, Lysara saw it too. She did not look up at him. The enemy outside the walls must have smelled the change in the wind. Their attacks became erratic, probing rather than hammering. Some patrols reported seeing chaos banners lowered, replaced with unfamiliar sigils, testament to the endless shifting loyalties of the long war. Althar visited Vorsk that evening. "It is done," the Alpha Legion commander said smoothly. "Now Cadia will endure, on its own terms." Vorsk felt no triumph, only the weight of something irreversible. 3 nights later, Lysara came to him in the dark. She wore no armor, only a simple cloak, but her eyes were the same steel grey as the day they had met on the firing range. "You've chosen your side," she said quietly. "So I've chosen mine." She set a small data slate on his desk. The display flickered to life, showing a coded astropathic burst, ready to transmit. Its header bore the seal of the Officio Assassinorum. "This will reach Terra in less than a day," she said. "They'll send someone, maybe many someones, and they'll end you before you can finish what you've started." For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the fortress guns barked, and the faint roar of battle echoed through the night. "You would bring them here?" Vorsk asked finally. "To kill me and doom Cadia?" "I would bring them here," she said, "to save it." Junhi moved without thinking, his hand closing around hers on the slate. For a moment, he thought she might fight him, but she only stared at him, eyes full of something worse than hatred, pity. Then she let go. The transmission never left the tower. Vorsk destroyed the slate in the forge fires himself, watching the metal curl and blacken until no trace of the code remained. Lysara was not seen again after that night. Some said she left through the southern postern gate. Others whispered she had been taken by the Alpha Legion. Vorsk never asked. The siege dragged on into its 5th month. The enemy no longer sought to break the walls. They meant to bleed Cadia until it collapsed inward, choking on its own divisions. And yet, somehow, the fortress endured. The Alpha Legion spoke of a new plan, one that would not merely hold Cadia, but remake it into something untouchable. Vorsk listened, and for the first time, he felt no hesitation. If Terra would call him traitor, then he would give them a traitor worth remembering. And thus, Cadia lived on, though the thing that bore its name was no longer the world the Imperium had known. The fortress no longer smelled of smoke. It smelled of ozone from the new weapon forges, of strange oils brought in sealed Alpha Legion containers, of the cold tang of alien machinery grafted onto Imperial stone. 5 months had passed since the banners of Terra had come down. In that time, Cadia had become something unrecognizable, not fallen, not saved, but transformed. Where once the Aquila hung over the gates, there now coiled the twin-headed serpent. It was painted in deep, oily blues, so dark it seemed to drink the light. Beneath it, the words of the old Cadian oath were still carved in stone, but someone had scratched a second phrase beneath, in a script that no loyal son of the Imperium would dare to write. The changes came in layers, like frost claiming a window. First, the Alpha Legion dismantled the Imperial command structure, replacing it with their own circles, cells of officers who knew only fragments of the larger plan. Vorsk learned quickly that even he was not privy to all of it. Second, the fortress communications were redirected through a network of ciphered relays. No message left Cadia without passing through the hands of Althar's cryptographers. Those few astropaths still alive were kept in isolation, their minds steeped in hypnotic loops to break Imperial conditioning. Third came the quiet, methodical rearming. Weapons crates marked with Imperial Forge World stamps arrived in the dead of night, yet when opened, the guns within were subtly altered. Different firing mechanisms, different ammunition calibers, and inside the barrel, etched so faintly it could only be seen under a scanning lens, the serpent sigil again. Vorsk told himself these were necessary measures. After all, the enemy was still at the gates, but the truth was harder. The Chaos warbands had withdrawn weeks ago, not driven back, but simply gone. No retreating banners, no formal end to the siege. They had melted away into the wastelands, leaving Cadia ringed with ruins and unburied dead. The Alpha Legion claimed this was a sign of victory. Vorsk was not so sure. One night, while walking the high battlements, he saw them. On the far horizon, flickers of light, signal lamps in patterns too complex for any Imperial code. A dozen points, pulsing in unison, then vanishing. Althar stood beside him, silent. "They are yours," Vorsk said finally. "They are ours," Althar corrected, his voice calm as ever. "Friends and future allies. The galaxy is wide, Lord Vorsk, wider than the corpse god's cage." Vorsk did not reply. The wind off the ruins carried the faint smell of blood and ash. The people of Cadia adapted, or tried to. Some bent the knee willingly, eager to trade one master for another if it meant food in their bellies. Others kept their loyalty to the throne hidden, whispering prayers to the Emperor when no one could hear. There were disappearances, always at night. A man might be seen speaking too boldly in the market, and by morning, his home would be empty, his family gone as if they had never existed. The Alpha Legion called it precautionary cleansing. Vorsk called it what it was, fear made into policy. And yet, Cadia prospered. The broken Khazars were rebuilt with alien alloys that resisted lasfire and bolter shells alike. The forges turned out weapons faster than the old Munitorum ever had. The orbital docks, long starved of resources, were restored, sleek new warships gliding from their frames like blades from the sheath. Vorsk walked those docks often. He told himself it was to oversee the work, but in truth, he went to remind himself of what all this was for. Cadia would live, even if it had to live as something unholy. It was on the first day of the 6th month that Althar brought him to the crypt vault. The air inside was cold enough to sting the lungs. Runes pulsed faintly on the floor, tracing patterns that hurt the eye. In the center stood a coffin of blackened adamantium, bound with chains that hummed with suppressed energy. "This," Althar said softly, "is your future." Vorsk stepped closer, feeling the pressure in his skull. Inside the coffin, something shifted. A slow, deliberate movement, like a sleeper stirring. "What is it?" Vorsk asked. "It is a commander," Althar replied. "One who has fought 100 wars across 10,000 years. When the time comes, it will rise, and Cadia will be the spearhead of a new crusade. Vorsk stared at the coffin. And if I say no, Althar smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. You will not say no. That night, Vorsk dreamed. He stood on a plain of glass under a sky without stars. The coffin was there, open now, and from it rose a figure in armor older than Cadia itself. It had no face, only a mask of silver. Its voice was many voices, speaking in harmony and discord at once. You are mine, and I am yours, it said. Together, we will break the galaxy open. Together, we will make it anew. When Vorsk woke, he could still feel the weight of that voice in his chest. In the months that followed, Cadia began to reach outward, not with pleas for aid to Terra, but with offers of alliance to the unaligned, the outcast, the heretic. Ships left under false flags, returning with cargoes of strange technology and stranger recruits. Some bore the sigils of chaos. Others claimed no allegiance at all, but all swore themselves to Cadia, and by extension, to the Serpent. On the anniversary of the siege's beginning, Vorsk stood on the walls. Below him, a parade marched, not of Imperial Guard, but of new regiments in hybrid armor, bearing both the Cadian Gate and the Alpha Legion Serpent. The people cheered. From the crowd, a child's voice called out, "The Emperor protects!" The cheers faltered for a moment. Soldiers turned, searching for the source. Vorsk's eyes swept the crowd, but he saw nothing, only the serpent banners, rippling in the wind. That night, in the quiet of his quarters, he allowed himself one truth. Cadia was not lost, but neither was it saved. It was something else. Something that would make the Imperium bleed in the years to come. And when that day came, he would not hesitate, because the galaxy did not belong to the Emperor, nor to chaos. It belonged to those who could take it. The storm began in silence. There was no declaration, no sudden clash of fleets, only faint changes in the data feeds, outlying beacons winking out one by one, merchant ships arriving weeks late with empty holds and haunted crews. Vorsk had learned to watch for such things. Wars often began in whispers before they roared. In the council chambers of Casa Mirak, he gathered the captains. The map before them was a galaxy of lights, each a system either loyal, hostile, or unclaimed. Half of the unclaimed lights were going dark. "Pirates?" asked Commander Saren, her voice heavy with doubt. "No," Vorsk said. "Pirates do not move with such precision." Althar was leaning in the shadows, arms folded. He didn't speak until the silence had grown uncomfortable. "They are hunters," he said. "An old breed. They feed on the dying edges of empires, and they have scented something here." "Then we hunt them first," Saren snapped. Vorsk shook his head. "Number we, draw them in. Let them think Cadia is blind, unprepared. And when they come," he clenched his fist, "we make an example so severe it will echo through the void." The plan was simple in design, but steeped in risk. Cadia's new fleet would leave its shipyards seemingly unguarded, its orbital patrols slackened. The enemy, whoever they were, would be allowed to reach the near moons before the trap was sprung. For 2 weeks, the bait was set. Civilian freighters went about their business as if nothing was wrong. Patrol craft failed to respond to phantom distress calls, and all the while, Vorsk's chosen warships, sleek hybrids of Imperial hulls and alien design, waited in silent orbit on the far side of the planet. They came on the 17th day, The void sensors caught them first. 12 ships, long and needle-like, with hulls of bone-pale alloy. They moved like predators, no wasted thrust, no formation, each angling to intercept a different Cadian target. When the first freighter vanished from the scopes, Vorsk gave the order. The void lit up in a heartbeat. From Cadia's dark side surged the fleet, Vigilant Fang, Serpent's Breath, Casa Vorin, and the rest, engines flaring cold blue. Lances fired, tearing through the lead raider before it could break orbit. Boarding pods followed, smashing into enemy hulls with surgical precision. Vorsk himself was aboard the Vigilant Fang, its command deck a fusion of Gothic archways and sleek Xenos consoles. He watched the battle unfold on the tactical hololith, the serpent banners flickering above each allied vessel. The enemy fought like cornered animals. They had no shields, only hulls that seemed to drink lass fire until they cracked. Their weapons were jagged bursts of green light, slicing through the void with unnatural speed. On the comms, boarding teams reported horrors. Crew that moved in silence, their faces smooth and eyeless, skins stretched like parchment over bone. They did not scream when cut down. One by one, the raiders were gutted, their remains left to drift. But Vorsk ordered 2 of them taken intact. You cannot tame these things, Saren warned him later. No, Vorsk agreed, but we can learn from them. In the aftermath, Cadia's streets were filled with parades. The people cheered their new fleet, cheered the safety of their trade routes. And though the twin-headed serpent flew beside the Cadian gate, few spoke against it now. Victory had a way of silencing doubt. But in the shadow of the celebrations, darker work was being done. Althar's cryptographers cracked the enemy's data cores. What they found was not the lair of a pirate band, but a map, a web of systems, each marked in a code older than Imperial Gothic. It was not random plunder. The raiders had been cutting through space along a single curved line, like a claw mark carved into the galaxy, and Cadia now lay at the very edge of that line. They are scouts, Althar told Vorsk in private, the first teeth of something greater. How much greater? Althar only smiled faintly. Greater than you have yet imagined. So the choice came quickly. To wait was to risk being overrun by whatever force sent the raiders. To act was to step fully into the role Cadia now played, not as a shield of the Imperium, but as a spear of its own destiny. The council met in secrecy. Voices clashed, Saren urging immediate strikes into the raider territory, others warning that Cadia's new fleet was untested in prolonged war. In the end, Vorsk's voice decided it. We go to them, he said, not for conquest, not yet, but to mark the serpent's reach across the stars. The campaign was brutal. Cadia's fleet cut through 6 frontier systems, each stranger than the last. Moons carved into perfect spheres, planets stripped to their cores, drifting husks of ships older than human history. They met resistance in every system, but the raider fleets, once united, now fought piecemeal, as if something was pulling them away from one another. On the ice world of Velkrath, Vorsk led ground forces personally. The enemy's cities were burrowed deep beneath the glaciers, lit by cold green fires. The fighting in those tunnels was slow and savage, every step paid for in blood. When Velkrath fell, Vorsk ordered its forges dismantled and rebuilt under Cadian control. But each victory brought new questions. Prisoners, those that could be taken alive, spoke no tongue, wrote no script. And yet, when placed in proximity to the black coffin in the crypt vault, they would fall to their knees, trembling. Vorsk began to suspect the truth. These raiders were not merely foes. They were part of the same shadowed web into which Cadia had now willingly stepped. It was after the Velkrath campaign that the first whispers reached him, reports of unrest back home. Kassar Vorin's people had begun resisting Alpha Legion oversight, sabotaging supply routes, smuggling weapons into the hands of Imperial loyalists. Sauron brought him the intelligence in person. "They think the old Imperium will come for them," she said. "They think you are a traitor who can still be redeemed." Vorsk stared at the holomap. "Then they are fools. The Imperium does not forgive, and neither will I." The decision to act was swift. A message was sent to Kassar Vorin: surrender the ringleaders, or face the full weight of the Cadian fleet. They refused. The bombardment was precise, targeted at strongholds rather than civilian sectors, but still, the Kassar burned for 3 days. When it was over, Vorsk walked its streets in person, the air thick with ash. "Let this be the last time Cadia bleeds for disobedience," he said, his voice carrying over the ruins. The people listened. Whether out of fear or loyalty, he could not yet tell. By the campaign's end, Cadia's reach had doubled. Trade routes were secure, outposts established in the ruins of raider space. The serpent flew in systems that had not seen human banners in centuries. And yet, in the quiet of his chambers, Vorsk felt the weight of the black coffin more than ever. It had not opened. Not yet. But some nights, when the fortress was silent, he swore he could hear the faint sound of breathing from deep within. When the galaxy was moving, the Imperium would not ignore Cadia's defiance forever. The Raiders' masters would surely come seeking revenge. And somewhere in the dark between stars, allies and enemies alike were watching the serpent grow. Vorsk stood before the great holomap once more. There was no going back. The night was restless. Cadia's new order breathed uneasily beneath the twin-headed serpent's shadow. The fortress walls had grown silent, but the silence was heavy with anticipation, like the pauses before a tempest's first strike. Soldiers patrolled the ramparts with faces drawn tight, eyes flickering to the dark horizon beyond the shattered wastelands. Inside the war room, the air hummed with the soft drone of arcane machinery. The hololith's cold glow etched sharp lines across the faces of the council. Vorsk stood near the center, fingers clenched behind his back. Across from him, Althar's gaze remained unreadable. "We've pushed the raiders back," Vorsk said, voice steady, though his mind churned. "But their masters have yet to reveal themselves, and the Imperium's silence grows deafening." Althar nodded. "They watch. They wait. The High Lords are cautious, but caution breeds opportunity." Commander Sauron folded her arms. "Our people suffer. The mutinies in Kassar Vorin grow. Loyalty fractures beneath the serpent's shadow." Vorsk's eyes darkened. "Loyalty is a luxury we cannot afford. Not now." Days later, a courier arrived from Kassar Vorin, her robes dusted with ash and blood. "Sauron," Vorsk said as she entered his chambers. "What news?" "The mutiny grows more organized," she replied. "A faction calls itself the True Cadian Guard. They claim to resist the Alpha corruption and the Serpent's dominion." Vorsk's jaw clenched. "So, Lizara's ghost walks still." Sauron hesitated, then nodded. "She leads them." The revelation settled over Vorsk like a storm cloud. Lysara, the voice of purity, of defiance, the one who had vanished that fateful night, had become a symbol of rebellion within the fortress's shadowed streets. He knew her well. Her steel-grey eyes, once filled with grief, now burning with resolve. She had chosen to fight him, to risk everything for an impossible hope. Yet Vorsk did not hate her. Not anymore. He hated what she represented, the last tether to the Imperium's dream that Cadia might be saved without sacrifice. Vorsk convened his trusted circle in the crypt vault beneath the fortress. The black coffin lay at the room's center, chains humming faintly with suppressed power. "This war will be fought in shadows," Vorsk said, voice low. "The true Cadian guard must be broken, or we will lose everything." Althar's serpent eyes gleamed. "I have agents already within their ranks. Their loyalty is as fragile as the stars." "Then we strike with precision," Vorsk replied. "No indiscriminate slaughter. We cut out the rot and preserve the body." The hunt began. Vorsk dispatched his shadow operatives, silent, unseen, as the fortress itself turned into a labyrinth of paranoia. In the hidden warrens, loyalists whispered prayers to the Emperor, clutching relics of old Cadia. Yet for every traitor unmasked, 2 more rose in their place. The serpent coiled tighter, but the poison spread. One night, beneath the fractured moonlight, Vorsk confronted a captured insurgent. The man was young, eyes wide with fear and fury. "Why do you fight us?" Vorsk asked. "For Cadia," the insurgent spat. "For the Emperor's light." "And do you see that light in this fortress now?" Vorsk countered. "Or only shadows?" The prisoner hesitated, then whispered, "Hope." Hope. It was a dangerous thing. Vorsk felt it slipping through his grasp as the rebellion grew. In the silence that followed, he understood. The war for Cadia was no longer just against the external enemy. It was a war for the soul of the world. Weeks passed. The fortress held. The rebellion was contained, but not crushed. Lysara's name echoed like a ghost song through the halls. Then came the report. Lysara had vanished again, this time with no trace. Vorsk stared at the black coffin, its faint pulse a grim reminder. The commander inside waited, and so did the fate of Cadia. The fortress held its breath. Days bled into nights, and nights into whispers. The absence of Lysara stirred a void that gnawed at the hearts of many, some with hope, others with dread. Vorsk walked the halls of Castle Murak alone, the weight of command pressing heavier with each passing moment. The serpent banners fluttered silently above, their shadows crawling like living things across the ancient stone. In the council chamber, a new tension had settled. Saren's gaze, once sharp and unyielding, now flickered with doubt. Even Althar, whose face was carved from shadow and secrets, showed signs of impatience. "Lord Vorsk," Saren began cautiously, "our grip weakens. The true Cadian guard spreads. Without Lysara's leadership, they fracture. But the embers still burn." Vorsk's fingers tightened into fists. "The embers will burn. And when they do, we will be ready." The report arrived in a whisper. A fleet approaching through the warp, cloaked in shadows older than the Imperium. Alarms screamed through the fortress, yet no fleet had been seen on the void sensors. This was a warp-born menace, something that did not obey the normal rules of space and time. The council met again. Althar's voice was cold and certain. "This fleet bears the mark of the inheritors, Xenos from beyond the known galaxy. They come not for Cadia, but for the void itself." Saren frowned. "If they pass through Cadia's sector, they will bring war to our doorstep." Vorsk nodded grimly. "Then we must prepare, not just for war, but for survival." The days grew darker. Cadia's new fleets were reinforced and refitted with the latest weapons scavenged from raider wrecks. Psychers and technomancers labored to weave protective wards, ancient sigils of power and secrecy. Yet Vorsk's thoughts drifted again to the black coffin in the crypt vault, its slow pulse an unyielding reminder of the cost of their survival. He knew the commander inside would be needed soon, but to awaken such a force was to gamble with fate. Then came the betrayal. It was subtle, a whisper here, a shadow there. Supplies vanished, key officers suddenly declared missing. The true Cadian Guard, fractured but not defeated, had spies deep within the fortress. Vorsk felt it in his bones before the evidence surfaced. Saren brought him the proof in a sealed case. "This is from the armory," she said. "Weapons stolen, tech missing. Someone wants us weak." "Someone is playing a dangerous game," Vorsk replied, "and I intend to find them." The search tore through the fortress. No stone was left unturned. Cells were purged, suspects interrogated beneath starlit arches. Yet the traitors moved with ghostly precision, always one step ahead. Vorsk grew restless. Every betrayal cut deeper than the last. The serpent's grip tightened, but so did the pressure from within. One evening, beneath the flicker of dying hollow fires, Vorsk confronted Althar. "Are you certain we can trust our own?" he asked quietly. Althar's serpent eyes glimmered like liquid night. "Trust is a currency too costly for Cadia. We survive through control, and control through knowledge." Vorsk's voice dropped. "Then the question is this: how much control is enough before we become the monsters we swore to fight?" Althar said nothing. The answer came too late. During a routine patrol of the outer bastions, a brutal ambush shattered the fragile peace. A squad of Cadian guardsmen was slaughtered. Survivors spoke of enemies wearing familiar armor, twisted and corrupted, but unmistakably Cadian. The rebellion had become a contagion. Vorsk ordered a purge, unlike any before. The true Cadian Guard was hunted mercilessly, their numbers decimated by a campaign of fire and steel. But as the purge spread, whispers grew louder, that the rebellion was no mere uprising, but a symptom of something greater, something old. In the deepest crypts, Vorsk finally gave the command. The black coffin must be opened. The air was thick with incense and ancient rites as the chains unraveled, pulsing with energy older than the stars. From within, the commander stirred, a figure clad in armor that gleamed like obsidian, eyes burning with an eternal fire. Vorsk met his gaze, feeling the weight of millennia settle on his shoulders. The commander spoke, not with words, but with a force that echoed in his soul. "I am the sword you forged in darkness," it said. "Now we shall cut the galaxy anew." For the fate of Cadia was sealed. The old world was dead. From its ashes rose something darker, something inevitable, and as the stars blinked coldly overhead, Vorsk understood that the true war was only beginning. The awakening was not gentle. Chains that had bound the ancient commander rattled and sparked, like echoes of forgotten wars bleeding through time. In the shadowed crypt beneath Kasr Mirak, a presence long buried beneath centuries of silence rose again. Vorsk watched, heart pounding, as the armored figure stepped from the coffin. Its gaze, an abyssal fire, swept the chamber, not with curiosity, but with cold calculation. "You called me," it said, voice low and fractured as if drawn from the depths of the void itself. "Yes," Vorsk replied, "because Cadia stands on the edge of oblivion." The commander's helmet tilted, studying him with an intensity that made the air grow thick. "You seek to turn the tide," it said. "But to what end? Power, survival, redemption?" Vorsk hesitated. The question was not idle. What did he truly seek? To save Cadia, or to shape the galaxy in his own image? The commander moved through the fortress like a shadow made flesh. Soldiers whispered of his presence, calling him the Warden of the Serpent. His armor was unlike anything seen before, a fusion of necrotic metal and warp-touched alloys, etched with runes that pulsed faintly in the dark. Wherever he went, the atmosphere shifted. Even Althar's serpent eyes showed flickers of caution. Yet he bore no words of mercy. His methods were ruthless, his judgments swift. In the council chambers, tensions reached a breaking point. Saren stood before the hololith, her voice sharp. "We have traded one threat for another. This Warden is no savior. He is a weapon forged in darkness." Althar's eyes glittered. "A weapon is only as dangerous as the hand that wields it." Vorsk's gaze fell to the floor. "The hand is mine, but the blade is ancient." The days that followed were a crucible of fire and betrayal. Under the Warden's command, the true Cadian Guard was hunted with cold precision. Yet as their numbers dwindled, new horrors surfaced. Reports came of prisoners disappearing, replaced by cold, silent soldiers who obeyed without question. Vorsk's sleep grew restless, haunted by dreams of endless wars, faces twisted in pain, and the Warden's mask staring back at him with unreadable contempt. One night, Vorsk found himself alone with the Warden in the crypt vault. The commander's voice was a whisper. "You carry a heavy burden, Lord Vorsk. The legacy of Cadia is one of sacrifice." Vorsk swallowed the bitterness rising in his throat. Sacrifice, betrayal, they seem inseparable. The Warden's eyes glowed faintly. Because those who build empires must be willing to burn them down. The war beyond the fortress walls grew fiercer. The inheritors, those shadowed Xenos from the void, began to press into Cadia's outer systems. Skirmishes erupted in the cold expanse, fleets clashing in bursts of fire and shattered hulls. Yet the Warden insisted on a different approach. Guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and war by shadows rather than open battle. Cadia's new fleets adapted, learning to fight a hidden war where every victory came at a price. Within the fortress, cracks deepened. Saren confronted Vorsk one evening, her voice weary but resolute. "We are losing ourselves, Vorsk. The Emperor's light fades beneath the serpent's shadow." He looked at her, eyes hard but tired. "What choice do we have? To cling to the past or to forge a new future?" She shook her head. "This future is darkness." The commander's presence grew more commanding. His silent soldiers spread through the fortress like a creeping fog, enforcing order and crushing dissent. Some whispered that the Warden was not merely a soldier, but a fragment of the old Necron dynasties, beings who had mastered immortality through cold, merciless will. Vorsk neither confirmed nor denied. One night, a desperate message arrived. Casa Vorin was under siege, not from outside, but from within. Loyalists and rebels clashed in brutal street battles, tearing apart what little peace remained. Vorsk gathered the council. "We must act. If we lose Casa Vorin, we lose Cadia itself." Plans were drawn swiftly. The Warden would lead a purge, swift and unrelenting. The battle for Casa Vorin was savage. Streets ran red with blood as old friends turned on each other. The warden moved like a spectre of death, dismantling resistance with cold efficiency. Yet even as the rebellion was crushed, Vorsk's heart broke. This was not victory. It was survival born from ruin. In the aftermath, as the fortress smoldered, Vorsk found himself once more in the crypt vault. The warden stood before the black coffin, his voice softer now. "Do you fear what we have become?" Vorsk met his gaze. "I fear what we must do to endure." The warden inclined his head. "Then you are ready." The path ahead was clear and terrible. Cadia was no longer a bastion of the Imperium. It was a crucible of ambition, betrayal, and survival. And at its heart stood Vorsk, the man who had called the ancient darkness forth to save a world at the cost of his own soul. The galaxy bled in silence. The void stretched endlessly beyond Cadia, cold and unforgiving, as if the stars themselves mourned the fate of the world below. The fortress's ancient walls bore the scars of countless battles, both visible and unseen. The serpent banners fluttered weakly in the stale air, symbols of a fractured hope. Vorsk stood at the edge of the grand balcony, staring out over the shattered plains. His thoughts churned, tangled between duty and doubt, ambition and regret. The black coffin lay behind him, silent and heavy, a dark promise that pulsed in time with his own heartbeat. Within the fortress, whispers grew louder. The remnants of the true Cadian guard had not vanished. Their ghostly defiance lingered like a poison, infecting hearts with hope and despair. Lysara's name was invoked as both a rallying cry and a curse, symbol of the resistance that refused to die. Saren approached Vorsk in the war chamber, her voice steady but burdened. "Lord Vorsk, the rebellion festers beneath the surface. Our people are torn between loyalty to you and the memory of what Cadia once was." Vorsk's gaze hardened. "Then we must either heal this wound or let it consume us." The warden, the eternal sentinel risen from the crypt, moved with purpose through the corridors. His presence was a constant reminder of the price paid for survival, a fusion of ancient power and relentless will. Vorsk sought his counsel one evening, beneath the flickering glow of arcane lamps. "The rebellion threatens to undo all we have built," Vorsk said quietly. "What is your judgment?" The warden's eyes gleamed with cold fire. "Sacrifice. Ruthless sacrifice. To save the many, the few must be broken." Vorsk swallowed the weight of those words, feeling the growing chasm between what was necessary and what was just. Outside the fortress, the void itself stirred. The inheritors advanced with silent dread, their fleets weaving through the warp like predatory shadows. Skirmishes erupted across the outer systems, each battle a desperate attempt to hold the line. Cadia's fleet, reforged and hardened, met them with fierce resolve. But each victory was stained with loss, each triumph shadowed by the creeping cost of war. Within the Citadel's halls, trust frayed. Althar moved through the shadows, his serpentine gaze probing for signs of betrayal. The line between ally and enemy blurred as paranoia took root. Saren confronted Vorsk with urgent words. "We cannot trust even our closest. The serpent's venom spreads." Vorsk nodded, the bitter taste of truth heavy on his tongue. "Control is an illusion. We grasp at smoke." In the depths of the fortress, a secret council convened. Vorsk, Saren, Altar, and the warden gathered beneath the black coffin, their faces etched with the burden of impossible choices. "We stand at a crossroads," Vorsk declared. "The rebellion grows. The inheritors approach. We must choose submission destruction, or transformation. Siren's voice trembled. Transformation is a path to darkness. The warden's eyes burned steady. Darkness is the crucible of power. Althar's serpentine smile was thin, and power is the only language the galaxy understands. A plan emerged, a desperate gamble. Vorsk would lead a final campaign to crush the rebellion within, even as Cadia's fleets prepared to face the inheritors in open battle. The cost would be immense. As the campaign began, Lysara reappeared, scarred, hardened, a living spectre of defiance. She confronted Vorsk beneath the shattered arches of Kasser-Vorin. "You have become what we feared," she said, a tyrant wrapped in the serpent's coils. Vorsk met her gaze, the weight of his own choices reflected in her eyes. "I am what the galaxy made me," he replied, "a survivor." Their confrontation was fierce, a clash not only of weapons but of ideals, a battle for the soul of Cadia itself. The campaign tore the fortress apart. Loyalists and rebels clashed in brutal street battles, tearing through the remnants of hope. The warden led relentless purges, his cold efficiency both feared and reviled. Vorsk's heart fractured as friends fell and enemies rose, as lines blurred and sacrifices mounted. Outside, the Inheritor's fleet loomed, a shadow waiting to devour. Cadia's fate hung in the balance, caught between the fires of internal war and the darkness of the void. In the quiet moments before the storm, Vorsk stood once more before the black coffin, the warden beside him, silent as the grave. "We chose this path," Vorsk whispered. The warden nodded. "And now we walk it." The stars watched in cold silence as the serpent's tail reached its darkest hour. The dark halls of Kasser Mirak echoed with the cries of war. Cadia's heart, once a beacon of steadfast loyalty, now throbbed with chaos and dread. The rebellion, once whispered in shadowed corridors, had erupted into open defiance. Streets ran crimson beneath the relentless assault of loyalist and insurgent alike, each fighting for a fractured future. Vorsk stood atop the ruined ramparts, gaze heavy with the burden of command. The serpent banner hung tattered in the wind, a symbol of a legacy strained to its breaking point. "Commander," a voice called, breaking through the haze of battle. Siren approached, face lined with exhaustion and resolve. The warden reports heavy losses among his units. The rebels fight with desperation and cunning. Vorsk nodded slowly. Desperation breeds ferocity. And Lysara, she pressed, she remains unaccounted for. The name burned in the air between them like a spectre. Lysara, the ghost of Cadia's past, haunted every strategic decision and every faltering step toward salvation. "We must end this," Vorsk said, voice low but unyielding, "before all is lost." The warden's forces moved through Kasser-Vorin like a spectre of death, silent, relentless, and unfeeling. Where the rebels held, the streets became tombs. Where loyalists resisted, fire consumed all. Yet beneath the storm of violence, darker shadows crept. Whispers of betrayal within their own ranks surfaced. Officers turned traitor. Secret pacts forged in desperation. The serpent's grip was unraveling from within. Vorsk convened a war council in the fortress's deepest chamber. Althar's serpent eyes glimmered with cold calculation. The rebellion is not merely a defiance of authority. It is a symptom of a greater rot, one that festers in the very soul of Cadia. Siren's voice cracked with emotion. "Then what do we do? How do we save a world that no longer trusts its own?" Vorsk's gaze hardened. "We choose sacrifice, betrayal, redemption. The path is narrow, but it exists. Plans were made. The final assault would be swift, decisive, but the cost would be unthinkable. Vorsk would lead from the front, his will steel-forged against the tide of despair. At the night before the assault, Vorsk stood alone before the black coffin. The warden's voice was low, resonant. "The time has come." Vorsk nodded. "Then let us be the reckoning." The Gacha, ancient commander, stepped forward, his armor gleaming with eldritch light. A pulse of power filled the chamber, and the air thrummed with the weight of destiny. The battle began with fury unmatched. Cadia's forces clashed with the rebels in brutal combat, echoing through shattered streets and crumbling towers. The warden moved like a living shadow, cutting through foes with ruthless precision. Yet amidst the carnage, Vorsk's mind remained burdened. The line between friend and foe blurred. The price of victory etched deep scars upon his soul. In a shattered cathedral, Vorsk confronted Lysara. Her eyes burned with defiance, yet beneath the fire lay sorrow. "Why do you fight?" he asked. "To save what remains of Cadia's honor," she replied. "And at what cost?" Her silence answered more than words could. As dawn broke over the ravaged city, the rebellion was crushed, but not without sacrifice. Friends lay broken, hopes shattered. Vorsk stood amid the ruins, the weight of command heavy upon him. The serpent had struck hard, but the wounds ran deep. The war was far from over. The inheritors loomed beyond the stars, waiting for Cadia's strength to wane. And as Vorsk gazed into the cold light of dawn, he understood the terrible truth. The true enemy was not just the rebellion, nor the alien invaders, but the darkness within. The air in Kasmirak was thick with smoke and sorrow. The city, once a fortress of hope, now lay fractured, its streets scarred by fire and blood, its towers reduced to crumbling ruins. Vorsk stood atop the highest battlement, the weight of countless losses pressing down like a suffocating shroud. His eyes, hardened by war and betrayal, traced the horizon where the void swallowed the distant stars. The inheritors' fleet had arrived. Within the shattered council chamber, silence reigned. Zaren's voice broke the quiet, trembling but resolute. "We cannot endure another siege," she said. "Our forces are spent. The people falter. What hope remains?" Vorsk's gaze was steel. "Hope is all that remains." Althar, ever the serpent in the shadows, smiled thinly. "Hope is a blade that cuts both ways." The warden moved silently beside Vorsk, an unyielding sentinel forged in ancient darkness. "There is still a path," he said, voice low and certain. "A final sacrifice to turn the tide." Vorsk met his gaze. "And what price must we pay?" The warden's eyes flickered with cold fire. "Everything." His plans were drawn in whispered shadows. A ritual older than the Imperium itself would be unleashed, binding the soul of Cadia to a power beyond mortal reckoning. Vorsk knew the cost. The ritual demanded a soul to be offered, a sacrifice to awaken the ancient forces slumbering beneath the fortress. Lysara re-emerged from the ashes of rebellion, her spirit unbroken despite the ruin around her. She sought Vorsk in the crypt vault, the weight of years etched in her scars. "You walk a dark path," she said, voice fierce yet pained. "I walk the only path left," Vorsk replied, "one that will save Cadia or doom it." Their eyes locked, a silent battle of wills, hope and despair intertwined. The ritual began. Arcane symbols burned bright as the warden chanted in a tongue lost to time. The black coffin pulsed with eldritch energy, the ancient commander's armor glowing like a star reborn. Vorsk stepped forward, his voice steady despite the storm raging within. I offer my soul for Cadia's salvation. In a blinding light engulfed the chamber. Power surged through Vorsk's veins, a maelstrom of agony and strength. He felt centuries collapse within moments, memories not his own, battles long past, and a weight of existence that crushed and elevated him all at once. When the light faded, Vorsk stood transformed. No longer merely a man, but a beacon of ancient power, his eyes glowing with the fire of stars long dead. The warden bowed, a silent acknowledgement of the new era. Outside, the Inheritor's fleet breached the system. The skies above Cadia blazed with war. Vorsk, now a living symbol of sacrifice and power, led the charge. His voice rose above the cacophony, a rallying cry for a world on the edge of oblivion. The battle was apocalyptic. Ships clashed with thunderous fury, void flames licking the void like wild beasts. On the ground, soldiers fought with desperate valor, inspired by the immortal figure who stood at their head. But even as the tide turned, Vorsk felt the price of his choice. The ritual had bound his soul to Cadia, but it also chained him to an eternal torment, a reminder that immortality was a double-edged sword. His thoughts drifted to Lysara, to the friends lost, to the empire crumbling beneath him. As the final embers of battle died away, Vorsk gazed upon the ruined world. Victory had come, but at a cost that no song would sing. The serpent's shadow stretched long over the land, a testament to sacrifice, loss, and the tragic price of power. The age of Cadia was ending, but its legend would endure in the cold light of dying stars. The stars burned cold above Cadia, distant and indifferent witnesses to the world's final hour. The fortress walls, once proud and unyielding, now crumbled like ancient bones beneath the relentless weight of fate. The serpent banners hung tattered, whispering forgotten tales of glory and sacrifice as the dying sun cast its last pale light across the shattered plains. Vorsk stood alone on the highest battlement, the wind carrying the hollow echoes of 1,000 lost souls. His eyes, once fierce with the fire of leadership, now held the weary calm of one who had seen too much and paid too dearly. The ritual had changed him. No longer simply a man, he had become a vessel of power and pain, bound eternally to Cadia's fate. The warden's ancient force had fused with his own soul, an unbreakable chain that granted strength beyond mortal limits, yet exacted a cost deeper than flesh and blood. Immortality was a curse disguised as salvation. Vorsk felt every loss, every betrayal, every sacrifice etched into the very core of his being, an endless tide of sorrow and regret. The battle for Cadia had ended. The Inheritor's fleet was shattered, driven back into the void by the desperate valor of the defenders. Cadia's forces, though battered and broken, had held the line. But victory was hollow. The rebellion had fractured the world from within, and the cost of survival was etched in every ruined street, every fallen comrade. Vorsk's thoughts drifted to Lysara. Her defiance had been both a beacon and a curse, a reminder of what Cadia had lost and what it still might reclaim. He wondered if, somewhere beneath the ruins, her spirit still burned with that fierce light. In the quiet aftermath, the fortress was a tomb of memories. Survivors wandered like ghosts, haunted by the echoes of war and the heavy silence of loss. Vorsk moved among them, a silent sentinel bearing the weight of command and the burden of immortality. He entered the crypt vault one final time. The black coffin lay empty now, its ancient power spent in the ritual that had saved and damned Cadia. The warden's presence lingered like a shadow, a reminder of the choices made and the price paid. Vorsk knelt before the empty coffin, voice barely a whisper. Is this salvation or doom? No answer came, only the cold pulse of the fortress's heart. Outside, the stars continued their indifferent watch. Cadia's age was over. Empires would rise and fall, wars would rage, and the galaxy would remember the sacrifice of those who stood beneath the serpent's banner. Vorsk stood, eyes lifted to the dark sky. The cost of immortality was eternal vigilance, an endless cycle of loss and duty. Yet in the silence, a faint hope endured. For even as the suns died and empires crumbled, the spirit of Cadia lived on, in stories whispered among stars, in hearts forged by sacrifice, and in the memory of those who dared to stand when all seemed lost. The serpent's shadow faded into legend, and the galaxy turned, forever changed. Of the end.